While there have been numerous artists that have had number one singles or great albums, there have been very few artists that actually touch people with their music. Mary J. Blige is a fascinating blend of both of those things. From her debut album released in 1992 to still being relevant on the music scene decades later, Mary has been one of the best-selling artists in the business. She is the perfect example of a rose growing from the concrete. Her journey from child of the ghetto to one of the most beloved artists in music is a story of resilience, triumph, and transformation. Mary has risen from terrible surroundings and hardships to become a raw and powerful voice for women all over the world. Listen to our story as we discuss Mary's life, as she not only survived her rough upbringing, but thrived, using her pain to create music that touches everyone who hears it. Mary Jane Blige was born on January 11, 1971 in the Bronx, New York, to Thomas and Cora Blige. Thomas was a jazz musician, while Cora was a nurse. Mary was born into a life of turmoil, abuse, and violence. Her father struggled with substance abuse and also physically abused her mother. He would leave the family when Mary was only 4 years old. Periodically, he would return, resume the abuse that he was previously doing, then leave again. When Mary was very young, she used to listen to her father play the bass. Meanwhile, her father also had her and her sister singing scales. Around this time, Mary's mother would take her to church, which would give Mary a chance to sing. The songs she would sing and hear at church would later influence her singing style. When Mary was only 7, she won a talent contest by singing one of Aretha Franklin's songs. Aretha was one of her mother's favorite singers. Other favorites included Sam Cooke, Chaka Khan, Gladys Knight, Patti LaBelle, the O'Jays, Otis Redding, Mavis Staples, and Candy Staton. Mary revered her mother. Not only did she want to look like her, she wanted to be just like her. As a result, the people that were her mother's favorite singers became Mary's too. While Mary liked to sing, at this point in her life, she never thought she would be a singer or a star or anything like that. One thing that was happening was that singing was already becoming a refuge for her. When she did it, even if only for a little while, she was able to forget her surroundings and the way that her family was forced to live. Eventually, her parents divorced, and Mary, her mother, and her sister moved to the slow bomb housing projects in Yonkers, New York. Mary would later reflect that this place was not a great neighborhood for children, but especially for little girls. She went on to say that it was even worse in the summertime. Every now and then, Mary would get a chance to stay with her grandparents in Richmond Hill, Georgia, and also in Savannah, Georgia. It was a relief to get away from what was happening in Yonkers. Her visits down south also gave her more chances to sing in church, which she enjoyed doing. Eventually, though, Mary would get tired of going down south, and the trips to Georgia stopped. When she returned to New York, life was the same as it always was. It was no better outside of her house than it was in it, as the neighborhood Mary grew up in mirrored what was going on at home. She found herself surrounded by poverty, substance abuse, violence, and bad relationships wherever she went. Always seeing these things at such a young age, and for the entirety of her formative years, imprinted on young Mary's psyche. These things would play a big part in the way she approached and handled her life well into adulthood. As a child, Mary would often hear women in nearby apartments being physically abused by their husbands or boyfriends, their screams of pain echoing through the apartment's thin walls. She'd also see and hear women running down the halls, trying to escape from their abusers. Unfortunately, one of the worst things that could ever happen to a child happened to Mary. Mary says that she was violated when she was only 5 years old by someone her mother thought that she could trust with her daughter. Afterwards, young Mary wondered if what happened to her was somehow her fault. Much later, as an adult, Mary would say that for many years, what happened to her, as well as the shame of it, made her feel like she wasn't worth anything. Another problem that would become rampant where Mary lived when she was a teenager was the use of illicit drugs, specifically quack. Mary would later remark that you could smell the drug every time you stepped into the hallway. Those same hallways were dangerous for another reason. If girls stayed in them for too long, they were subject to being violated by whoever chose to do so. Mary has spoken to how her surroundings could have killed her. Conversely, she also has said that because of that same environment, she's alive. Having said that, life in Yonkers was an everyday battle. If you weren't fighting to prove yourself, you were fighting to avoid being jumped or robbed, or worse. When you're being picked on or bullied outside the house, you can get some relief from it when you go home. However, where do you go to escape when your own family is picking on you? Mary's relatives used to tease her about everything about herself, from the way that she walked, to her butt, to her feet, to her lips. They also told her that she wouldn't even finish high school. Sadly, this teasing made Mary try even harder to win their love. One of her happy memories from her childhood involved visits to a store up the block from where she lived. Sometimes, Mary would go to the store and sing. In exchange, she'd get free chips and grape juice. We're going to take a break from the story there to ask you to like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and repeat. We appreciate you checking out our videos. Now back to the story. But Mary lived in a neighborhood where people would get angry if they saw you have anything, even something as simple as a smile. She rarely smiled as a teenager because she didn't want to let people see that. As a means of escaping her life, her and her friends would go to hang out on the pier and drink their pain away. Singing was another escape for her, as it allowed her to forget that her and her family were struggling so much, and it helped her to feel free, even if just for a short time, from whatever she was going through. As a high school teenager, Mary was constantly fighting about one thing or another. After one incident, she had to go to the principal's office. When the principal asked her why she'd done what she did, Mary told him that it was because she didn't take any ish. When she said that, she was repeating a phrase that she had just heard her mother say the night before. It was this type of attitude that would eventually lead Mary into some of the more dark and destructive parts of her life. Mary dropped out of high school when she was 16 years old. To try and make ends meet, she would do her friend's hair, and for a while she also worked as a 411 directory assistance operator. During this time, while visiting a local mall, Mary did something that would change her life forever. In one of the small recording booths they used to have in malls around the country at that time, she recorded herself singing Anita Baker's hit song Caught Up in a Rapture. It wasn't a big deal to her, and she expected nothing to come of it. After all, kids all across the country were doing the same type of thing. When she took it home and played it, everyone loved it, but people's families were always saying that. Again, she didn't think anything of it. By this time, Mary's mother had a boyfriend named Jimmy Dillard. Dillard worked at the local GM plant. He also loved Mary's song, and he told her that he thought he could help her. Mary laughed when he said that, and shot him a look that said, "Who could you possibly know that could help me?" Beyond that, again, she didn't think much of it, didn't think much of what he had said. However, Dillard really did know someone who could help. He worked with a guy named Jeff Redd, who had recently signed with Uptown Records. Meanwhile, he was still working at GM because he was trying to get money together to pay for flyers for his performances. He also needed money to pay his band and to get clothes tailor-made for himself. Dillard took Mary's tape to work and presented it to Redd so that he could check it out. Redd listened to it. He was impressed. He was moved by the rawness of Mary's vocals. Afterwards, he took the tape to the main man at Uptown Records, Andre Harrell. Uptown was founded by Harrell, who was once part of the rap duo Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Later, Harrell worked for Def Jam Records, collaborating with top acts like LL Cool J, Run DMC, and the Beastie Boys. When he started his own label, Harrell's vision was to create music that blended the smoothness of R&B with the hard-edged style of rap music. What he heard on the tape fit into that vision. Later, Harrell will reflect that what he heard when he first listened to that tape was something he'd never experienced or had an opportunity to work with. He already knew in his mind that he had to sign her. To do that, he had to go see her. Harrell showed up to Mary's apartment complex in a black BMW 750. Mary was scared for him because he obviously looked like he had money, and she thought that somebody might try to rob him. After Harrell met Mary and her family, Mary proceeded to sing Anita Baker's entire Rapture album for him. Harrell's instincts were right. After hearing her in person, he immediately signed her to Uptown Records on the spot. At that point, Mary was the youngest member of Uptown's label. Afterwards, Harrell told Mary's family that Mary would sing for royalty one day. Mary was skeptical though, but at that time, no one could have known how right Andre was with what he said. However, before she came close to reaching the pinnacle of R&B music, she'd have to start first, and she'd have to go through some things. It would be over 3 years before her debut album would be released. Before she knew it, the small amount she received as an advance was gone. Occasionally, she would call Red, asking where he was because she needed to get something to eat. In the interim, she sang background on numerous songs, most notably Father MC's I'll Do For You. She also appeared in the video for the song. Additionally, Mary sang background on Red's debut album and toured with him as well. In the studio, working on her own material was both tough and time-consuming for Mary. For example, her first single was the song You Remind Me. When recording the song, she struggled to hit the proper notes, and she was forced to sing the song over and over again. It would take her over 3 days to finally get it right. Additionally, Mary was still very insecure. She didn't really know what she was doing, and she was just trying to survive. However, one person who was an unknown at the time would support her in finding the strength that she needed to perform. That person was Sean Puff Daddy Combs. At the time, he was a talent director at Uptown. He saw something in Mary that he thought that he could work with. In fact, he believed in her more than she believed in herself, and he gave her the confidence that she needed to be able to succeed. As a result, Harrell allowed Combs to produce Mary's first album. At the time, an R&B performer singing over hip-hop tracks, that wasn't a common thing. Moreover, Mary's style wasn't like anybody else's. While she wasn't a great singer aesthetically or to the ear, more importantly, you could feel what Mary was singing about. Puff Daddy helped convince her that it was okay for her to be rough around the edges and just be herself. Meanwhile, Misa Hilton, a friend of Puff's, began designing and creating custom clothing and looks that helped define Mary's style. The two of them would become the best of friends. Behind the scenes, Combs was already calling Mary the quote-unquote queen of ghetto love. The song You Remind Me would be included on the Strictly Business soundtrack that was released in October of 1991. Months later, Mary's debut album, What's the 411, was released on July 28, 1992. The title of the album spoke to two things. First, it was a nod to the fact that Mary used to work as a 411 operator. Secondly, it was a nod to another meaning of the term 411, street knowledge. In other words, if you wanted to know what was going on, you wanted the 411. The album's title was telling you that this new artist, Mary J. Blige, was the 411. Her album was a long time coming, but it was well worth the wait, as it made both Mary and Puff Daddy stars. We're going to stop the story right there. As usual, thank you again for joining us and listening to and watching our videos. Please be sure to come back for part 2 and also check out some of our other videos as well. Thanks again and see you soon.